Eric Bischoff makes a comment on fans comparing AEW to TNA, and I think he's 100% right. We talk about it next on the Squared Circle Psycho Babble. My name is Michael Vliet. Joining me is Ralph Vliet. Ralph, Eric Bischoff was on the Insight Podcast hosted by Chris Van Vliet, and it was asked about the comparisons of AEW to TNA, as there's a lot of fans out there that criticize AEW for having all these legends and former WWE talent. And here's what Mr. Bischoff had to say about it. He said, quote, "That's stupid and ignorant. I mean that in the literal sense. People who say those things have no real firsthand knowledge or experience. They have theoretical knowledge based on their fandom, but they don't really know what they're talking about." He would continue on to say, "I think what AEW is doing is by no means groundbreaking, but they are smart. Bringing in former WWE talent with international brand equity and a fan base, what is wrong with that? If you have to rely solely on that, I could see the argument. The wrestling audience is not one demo. It's family viewing. If people today understood the challenge of building a primetime product, you have to appeal to a wide variety of people. If you bring in a load of young, fresh talent, no one knows or cares about them." Ralph, your thoughts?
I agree with him 100%. Not only do I agree with him, but I would challenge people at this. We know that WWE right now is the largest wrestling promotion in the world, probably the one that's most recognizable across the world. Right. I don't think you're going to find anybody that's going to dispute that. It was Correct. Also one of the two larger companies during the Attitude Era, which was also the biggest time, the biggest peak in professional wrestling. So is there even at the independent level, you get guys who at some point traveled through, and I'm sure at some point worked with WWE. Mm-hmm. Most of the larger named guys are some of the mid-card guys or lower card guys during the Attitude Era worked in the WWE. You're not going to find many very promotions, whether they're smaller, whether they're larger, whether they're medium-sized, like you want to say like an AEW or a TNA or ECW, for example, back in the day. You're going to find guys past their prime, or you're going to find guys that were at one point or another contractually obligated to work for the WWE mm-hmm. that are now working in other rival promotions.
Right.
It's just the nature of the industry. So to say, for fans in general, to be critical of that, I think is kind of disingenuous, just because it happens everywhere. In every promotion, you're going to get guys that have worked in some of the larger companies, whether it's WWE or WCW, to be brought in just for the simple fact that they're trying to get some attention to their product and they're trying to sell tickets.
Exactly.
It's all about how you utilize those guys. What positions do you put them in? What type of roles do you put them in? And most importantly, are you drawing people in so they can see what else you have to offer, to see what makes you different than WWE and other promotions from the past, like he mentions.
Right. And, I get the argument that people are saying, oh, it's all, former WWE talent. They're just TNA 2.0. They're WCW 2.0. And to those that are anti-AEW with those kind of critiques and criticisms, let me just point this out. The reason why I did not like WCW was for that same criticism, but I was also 8 years old. So you got to bring in those recognized names to bring in viewers. And then it's the younger talent that keeps them there, whether that's WWE, whether that's AEW, Ring of Honor, Impact, New Japan, whoever. That's the goal. You got to bring viewers in somehow. And AEW's case, it's bringing in Sting. It's bringing in Arn Anderson. It's bringing in Tully Blanchard, Jake the Snake Roberts, Miro, Cody Rhodes, Jon Moxley. And then you get the guys like Kenny Omega, the guys like Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, Santana and Ortiz to keep you there.
Yeah, it's all about how you utilize your talent. What positions are you going to put them in? What type of roles you're going to put them in to make it feel fresh and interesting? So, I mean, one thing that Bischoff points out, and I think this is important to make sure that we touch on as well. Just because they're a rival promotion to the WWE or competition to the WWE doesn't automatically assume that, one, they're going to follow the same path in trying to get to that level where they can actually try to compete and be the number one wrestling promotion in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to suggest that, okay, well, they have a bunch of older guys, so they're following the same path or the same blueprint that TNA's followed. there's going to be differences in each company. When you look at WCW, right? WCW essentially signed a bunch of guys from WWE. Most of them ended up having different type of gimmicks, like Hulk Hogan became Hollywood Hogan. Hall and Nash were Hall and Nash. They weren't Razor and Diesel. Guys were put in different positions to make it feel special, to make it feel fresh. The other thing they did was Eric Bischoff went and he sat down and he pulled out a notepad, and this has been documented many times by his own account. He wrote down all the things that they can do to be different than the WWE. How can we stand out? What can we do to feel fresh? He also asked Ted Turner to go head to head with WWE and be live. So that was how WWE set themselves apart from what WCW did to set themselves apart from the WWE. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that AEW is following the same blueprint as WCW, nor does it mean, or are we suggesting that they have to follow the same blueprint as TNA, because anybody that's been paying attention to wrestling for the last 10 or so years, and even Bischoff touched on this, philosophically, from a management level, TNA may not have even wanted to compete with WWE at that level, or the people who are invested in TNA, or lack thereof, I should point out. They couldn't compete with WWE because they didn't have certain backing, and they didn't have the structure in place, and maybe they didn't have the management in place. They didn't have the people, as from a storytelling standpoint, in place to write content that was compelling, because we know that Vince Russo was there and Bischoff was there. And if you follow the podcasts, there was certainly some butting heads behind the scenes. Hogan was brought in. So just because AEW is signing guys that were in prominent roles in the WWE during the Attitude Era, or in other eras as well, doesn't mean they're going to follow the same path or blueprint that TNA, ECW, WCW, they're not following the same blueprint to try and catch up with WWE.
Right. And I mean, they're only 2 years in. So to have them go from the beginning and just use all guys that nobody knows, you're setting yourself up to fail at that point, because you watch that first episode on December 2nd, 2019, and you go, who the hell's this Kenny Omega guy? Who the hell is Santana and Ortiz? Who the hell is Kip Sabian? Who the hell is Sammy Guevara? If you have all those guys, but no Cody Rhodes, no Chris Jericho, no Jon Moxley, then it's going to flop. I'm sorry. It's going to flop. You need those guys that could bring in those viewers. And that's why, we could debate whether or not the ratings have been good or bad for AEW. And I think Eric Bischoff can agree that television has changed, but he also says that the audience is dying in professional wrestling. I somewhat agree with that, but that's for a different debate. But I will say, Eric Bischoff, the more I hear from him, especially now when he has this years of wisdom and learns from his mistakes, the more I feel like this guy should be Tony Khan's right-hand man. Just to, not as far as creative, but just like get him to the path of, if you already have 800,000 consistent viewers each week. With my guidance, I could get you to 1.5 million. Just listen to me.
Yeah, the one thing that I think Eric Bischoff definitely gets is the business side of things, and the importance of like marketing and advertising, and ensuring that you have certain things lined up from a financial standpoint and a backing standpoint. Like, he gets that aspect of it. And you're going to get people who, let's use, I guess, Jim Cornette as an example, who are so far to the right or left where it's, okay, it has to be according to wrestling standard. This is what they did traditionally, and we can't break from this because it doesn't make sense according to, the tag team rules or what's been done traditionally in the business. There needs to be a middle ground where you need somebody to come in who has that background knowledge of, I was a wrestling fan, I worked in the business, I get it, and also gets the importance of, as far as, culture today, just the importance that social media should play in terms of getting notoriety and getting some exposure for your company, ratings, truly understanding what the ratings and viewership actually translate to, not just, fans going back and forth and saying, oh, well, see, the numbers went down or they went up. Understanding what a draw truly is, and understanding somebody's true value, understanding what guys that they should be signing, and all of those types of things. Like, it's not just as simple as, let's sign a big name. Yeah, you can sign the big name. It doesn't ensure long-term success, and nor may not even ensure short-term success. But to get somebody that truly understands all aspects of the business is, if it were that easy, there'd be a handful of WWEs. And really, in reality, there's only one, and there's only been one other company that's been able to challenge Vince McMahon, and that was WCW, which Eric Bischoff was essentially the guy partially in charge of that.
Right.
So I think the biggest hurdle that AEW has to overcome, and there's an old saying, perception is reality. How can they set themselves apart from the WWE? How can they set the perception to the casual fan that they're not the number 2 company? Because that is always the perception that smaller companies, rival companies had to overcome. WCW was successful because they were able to overcome the perception that they were a second to the WWE or WWF back in the day.
Right.
It was made to feel like Nitro was must-see TV. How does AEW do that? How does AEW do that and ensure that they don't follow the footsteps of a TNA, an Impact, a Ring of Honor, an ECW, a WCW? That is the challenge here, because so many people, because WWE has been around for so long, because they were the front runner, and because so many people know the history of WWE, Vince McMahon buying out his competition, putting WCW out of business, buying out ECW, they're number 1.
Mm-hmm.
That's like another rival promotion coming into baseball, like the baseball, the world of baseball and sports, and saying, okay, we're going to compete and overtake the MLB, or even XFL overtaking the NFL.
Right.
Like that's kind of what they're up against here. And overcoming that perception to make it seem like your promotion is more prominent or more important or number 1 in the United States or in the world is not an easy thing, especially when you talk about branding. Just from, people seeing that one logo, what do they think about WWE? That's something that they're going to have to overcome, and not just them, but any other wrestling promotion that's going to try to compete with them.
Right. I totally agree. And the thing that I got out of the quote from Bischoff was, it's not just one demo. Wrestling is family oriented, know, and AEW, if you dive into the ratings a lot more, it is 18 to 49 males that are the main audience of AEW Dynamite. Now, and listen, I could show you our analytics on our podcast. It's 96% male. And the age group fits in that same 18 to 49 demographic, and most of our content revolves around AEW. So it makes a lot of sense what Bischoff is talking about. They need to find a way to get into those other audiences, break it to the female audience, break it to the 50 plus demo, break it to the 25-54 demo, and let's look at Raw, for example. As much as the Raw ratings have declined to record lows and the viewership is going lower and lower and lower, they keep going number 1 in almost every demo. Not just males 18 to 49. They're adults 18 to 49, female 18 to 49, females 12 to 34, 12 to 34 males. All these demos, they are number 1 or number 2 in, except 50 plus. That's where AEW needs to be. Now, with NXT all but announced moving to Tuesdays, maybe they get there on Wednesdays. But they're only 2 years in. And the fact that they've gotten this decent ratings in a world of cable television today, where more and more people are cutting the cord, they're still a top 5 television show in the 18 to 49 demographic, is good, but there's definitely room to improve. A guy like Bischoff can help you improve those numbers. Everyone keeps saying, how does AEW get to the 1 million viewers? How do they get number 1 in the 18 to 49? Find ways to target the women, find ways to target the older demographics, find ways to cross demographics. If you do that, you will easily hit the 1 million. Raw does it, and let's be honest, Raw is not that good most weeks, and they hit nearly 2 million every week.
Yeah, and you know what? If fans and other people weren't making these comparisons, then this question would not have even been brought up to Eric Bischoff. But realistically, whenever there's a promotion that comes up, or whenever there's a promotion that is going to try to rival the WWE, those comparisons are going to be made, whether they're warranted or they're unwarranted. So, to be able to set yourself apart from just being another TNA or being another ECW, in my opinion, the way that WCW was able to do this, and I think AEW can follow suit, they have to sign a big name guy from WWE. They have to get that. And you've gotten guys like a Chris Jericho, for example. He's certainly well past his prime. I'm not taking anything away from him. He's been very good in his run in AEW, but his best years are behind him, right? When you look at the roster of WWE, or you look at some of the free agents, for example, the guys that are truly going to be able to set the tone, for example, it's not going to be a guy like Cody Rhodes, who was to most fans, he's just, for somebody who doesn't watch AEW and just watches WWE, that's stardust to them. They don't know who Cody Rhodes is. They may have never watched AEW, so that's who Cody Rhodes is to them, unless you are an AEW fan.
Mhm.
Chris Jericho, obviously, like I said, well past his prime. I mean, when you look at the numbers, since you brought up the numbers, the unfortunate thing for AEW, unless you're going to talk about some of their earliest shows, their two largest draws were what? Shaq and Sting.
Mm-hmm.
And Shaq's not a pro wrestler that's going to be there every week, and fans didn't tune in the week after to see what happened. So, and you got Sting is certainly 60 plus. So what do they do? Who do they sign? To me, if you're going to set the tone, if you're going to prove that you're here to stay and you're a company that is truly trying to be the number one promotion in the world, you got to do what WCW did. You have to go after the bigger fish. You have to go after the number one top guys. That could either be a Cena, that could be a Punk, that could be a Lesnar. It could be somebody like a Kevin Owens, a Daniel Bryan. I don't know. But if they truly are going to compete, it can't be guys like you're promising, okay, a huge star and you deliver Christian. Christian's great. He's going to be really good for them. But when fans who watch TNA back in the day, they're going to see that and say, okay, well, that's TNA all over again. There's all these perceptions that unfortunately they're going to have to overcome, and they're going to have to win these fans over. And the only way you do that is by giving them a reason to tune in weekly.
But on the positive side, though, they did bring in Kurt Angle when he was in his prime and had a lot of good years in TNA.
And TNA doesn't get the success or the recognition that I think it should have gotten because, again, they weren't able to overcome that perception that they were anything but a smaller company than the WWE. This is still at that time, WWE was much larger, and I think most people would say much more popular, certainly, than it is right now. And they had guys that were still kind of household names. You had Cena, who was probably in his peak, or at least on the rise at that time. Edge was still there. You had a bunch of guys that were still there that were very noticeable within
Taker
the industry
and Shawn
and outside the industry. Exactly. Batista, they had all these guys. So right around the Ruthless Aggression area, they still had top guys that were big stars. And TNA, if you're going to make the comparison, just roster-wise alone, TNA in comparison to AEW is alike in the sense that they have a lot of guys that are, yes, former WWE guys, but bigger name guys in the industry. But they also have a lot of really good young talent. So TNA back in the day, AJ Styles, who else was
Samoa
there?
Joe,
AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, Bobby Roode, all types of guys who were there for a short amount of time. The Young Bucks were there for a little bit. You can go through the list. You can look at the roster. And TNA, I think their major downfall was management, bad creative, and maybe giving a little too much time to some of those guys, like the Main Event Mafia. I know some people are into them, but maybe Kevin Nash didn't necessarily need to be in that main event picture. We know Sting was there, so I mean that's where you have to find that balance. AEW has to find that balance. What roles do we put these guys in? The guys that are from yesteryear, the guys that were prominent stars in the WWE, what roles do we give them? But how can we also ensure the success of our company by relying on this young talent and putting them in positions to be successful, and also ensuring we are able to keep them under contract and not let them go to places like WWE? Because, some of these guys, Sammy Guevara, MJF, I'd imagine as soon as they're free agents, Vince is certainly going to be knocking on their door and trying to sign them to long-term contracts.
I'll close with this question, Ralph. Do you think AEW is right now using the legends and the former WWE talent better than how TNA did with the likes of the Main Event Mafia and some of those, guys that overstayed their welcome in the main event?
Yes, because I feel like what AEW is doing is they're surrounding the young talent around those guys. So we know that Darby is closely associated with with Sting right now. We know that group, whether it's the Revelation or FTR or whatever that Four Horsemen group is going to be called,
the Pinnacle,
they're associated with FTR and Tully Blanchard. And you can go down the list. Jericho creating the Inner Circle, that's done a lot for Sammy Guevara, Santana Ortiz, and you don't even necessarily have to be a fan of the storytelling or what they're giving you on a weekly basis, but you can't deny, like, a guy like Cody, for example, is in a worse off position than he was in WWE. He's in a much better position working in AEW. Yes. Somebody like, the unfortunate passing of Brody Lee, but Brody Lee was in a much better situation and helped bring relevancy to the Dark Order. I think that AEW might be doing a better job than TNA. There's all different types of things you can argue back and forth when trying to compare the two. But I think AEW would be in a much better position to actually try and compete against WWE and TNA, maybe because of financial situations, like Bischoff kind of touched on, not being able to get people to financially back them to compete against them. I think AEW has that with Tony Khan. So I think that they have the best chance at actually competing, and I don't think they'll make the same mistakes that TNA did.
No, I agree with you. I think there could be a little bit of improvement with some of the Legends use, like Jake the Snake Roberts. I don't think really does too much for Lance Archer. I don't think Arn really does too much for Cody, but I think Chris Jericho does great with the Inner Circle, giving relevancy for Sammy Guevara and Santana and Ortiz, even Wardlow with MJF, now tied with FTR and Tully, I think is going to be a great pairing there. And obviously in 2 years, I think they're in a much better position than when I was a wrestling fan in the mid 2000s and people were talking all this stuff about TNA. And I was not a fan of TNA for, whatever, creative decisions they were doing. And it looked kind of, second rate, like you brought up already. I think part of the reason is, the fans not being allowed in because of the pandemic. But even before then, I've never heard a crowd as loud as an AEW show, in a very long time, so they're definitely heading in the right direction. I just would like to see them target into other audiences to help them grow a little bit. And I think Bischoff will definitely be a key asset if they ever could get him to work again. I don't know if he wants it. I don't know if Tony Khan has asked for it. I know Bischoff has been on AEW Dynamite for a couple episodes when they do the press conferences and whatever gimmick things with Chris Jericho, but I think he would be a great asset. But let us know what you guys think of the comparison of AEW and TNA in the comments below. We also got Merchamania going on right now. 20% off all our merchandise using the promo code MANIA at checkout. Link in the description. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psychobabble.